Right, we are now live. Okay, there must be some viewers online by now. I think I can see you. Do try and find the chat button if you're online. The chat button is in the top corner of your screen. I think it's in the top right, maybe in the top left. Click on that to make sure you can see the chat. And then if you are able to see the chat, please do feel free to send me a little message saying I am online. Then that'll help me understand who is there. Right. Slavo has arrived. Fantastic. So if you just send me a little note, that would be fantastic. Yes, indeed, Slavo. New haircut. New week. New haircut. New life. Anything else like that? Right. So I know I've got at least one person. I think there are some other people who are logged on. Do feel free to send me a message. And we'll start in a moment or two. It's just gone 1 o'clock. Have a sip of coffee. Is there anybody else out there? If you're out there, please do and try and find the chat button facility, which is, I think is in the top corner, top right, top left, can't remember. And send me a little message. Yes, DCI is online. Yay! Good to see you online. Obviously, terrible things happening in Copenhagen the last few days. Very sorry to hear about all that. However, interesting as to where all that will go. Goran is here. Goran, hello! Haven't seen you since Lisbon, where it was much warmer than where I am at the moment. I presume you're in Berlin. Fiona's here as well. Great. Most people today seem to be from outside the UK. Oh well, hey ho. That's good. We want to be attracting a broad European audience. So I think we have our 4 people. I'm going to start. I think there are a few other people who are registered. Hopefully they will join us. Most of you, I think, have sat through one of my webinars before, so I'll try not to repeat too much, but obviously I think there are 1 or 2 people who've not been to a webinar before, so there will be some repetition. The first thing to say is that in a moment I will switch to the slideshow. When I'm on the slideshow, I won't be able to see the chat screen, but I invite you, if you have questions or comments, please submit those via the chat button, and I will come back and look at the chat button every 10 slides or so to see if anybody's got any questions, and I'll try and answer those as we before we go on. There will be questions at the end if you want, and of course after the webinar is over you can all send me an email with any other questions as you think of them, if that's relevant. Okay, so I'm going to now switch, with a bit of luck, the technology should be working. I'm going to now switch to the slideshow. I hope everybody got the text I sent this morning. If you got that, sent it as early as I could this morning so you can print it out and view that. Okay, over to the slides. Okay, so today we are looking at opportunities from the Creative Europe Culture Programme. This is the How to Interact standard slide. I'm going to have to change this because we really only ever need to use the chat button. So please use the chat button as the only thing you need to use. There is a time delay, so you don't hear me. It's at least 30 seconds after I have spoken. So I have to make sure I hang on if I'm asking a question to give you time to hear my question, and then you will respond. Background to the webinar today, the standard slides on the treaty and the mission statement. Clearly, this Article 167, which is the legal basis for supporting culture, is still relevant, particularly relevant to the culture programme. This is the culture article, and we are going to talk about the culture programme. So, flowering of the cultures of the member states, respecting national and regional diversity, bringing common cultural heritage to the fore. Without going into all the historical background to this, I think it is worth remembering that this phrase common cultural heritage is still there in the treaties. It indicates the basis on which the European Union is interested in funding projects and ideas and concepts and themes, and it may be a theme that some projects will want to explore in terms of underpinning the activities they're going to do, ways in which they're going to come together with partners from different countries to explore their own interpretation. There's no definition of common cultural heritage these days, so you and your partners may have your own innovative and amazing interpretation of Europe's common cultural heritage. I don't need to go into the other articles, other clauses of this article. They're not directly relevant to this particular program. They're just useful as background. However, it is important to know that as well as the Article 167 in the treaty, which makes it quite clear that the European Union will support culture and so on, we now have the Europe 2020 agenda, which is the mission statement for the European Union, and this sets out the themes for the current 10-year period, 2010 to 2020. And all programs, including the culture program, as we will see, have been asked to see if they can reflect these themes, and you'll see some of these themes start to come through even in the culture program, although there's nothing on this particular slide that sort of shouts culture. But the culture program has been asked to say, well, what are you doing about information communication technologies? What are you doing about competitiveness? What are you doing about employment? What are you doing about education and training, and so on and so forth? So we'll look at that as we come through. That's where those themes come from. They come from the Europe 2020 agenda. Always worthwhile mentioning your understanding of Europe 2020 when you are writing an application. The Commission like to think that everybody out here in the European world knows exactly what it is they've been up to, including Europe 2020. Okay, so the three types of funding programs: structural funds, money spent in a particular location; the transnational funds, which bring partners together; and the external actions, which support activities with other countries outside of Europe. The transnational funds is the focus of today because the culture program is within the transnational funds broad heading. Transnational funds, you'll see from this slide, only get 15% of the budget as opposed to the structural funds, which get a lot more. But obviously, if this is a transnational fund about culture, it's obviously a very important opportunity for the arts, culture, heritage, and creative industries. Okay, transnational funds. Now, before I go any further, just in case there's been some sort of disaster, I'm just going to go back and check to see whether everybody no one has sent any questions. So on the basis that no one has sent any questions, I'm going to assume that you can all see me and that we are all okay in carrying on with the slides. It's transnational funds. Okay, so these are some of the transnational funds. You'll see that Creative Europe at the bottom, not the smallest budget, but it's by far from being the largest. It's one of the smaller budgets there. 1.5 billion euros for a Creative Europe. So that's a good amount of money, and it is worth noting that the budget has actually gone up for the Creative Europe program, so that's a really good thing, but obviously it's not as large as some of them, the program budgets. The types of grants that are offered by the transnational funds, essentially project grants, where partners come from at least 3 different countries to get together and make some interesting, innovative activity happen, or mobility activities, which are about exchanges and visits and so on, and you can get small grants for mobility activities. Now, sadly, the culture program does not support small grants for mobility activities, so we can sort of just ignore that particular option because it's not within the culture program. The culture program is focused on projects. It is focused on 1 or 2 other things, but it's not focused, unfortunately, on mobility activities. Mobility, however, is a theme within the projects. So projects are expected to enable and encourage mobility of artists and creative practitioners. Okay. A wide range of themes and topics, links to Europe 2020 I've talked about, and match funding applies for projects. And I will talk in a little bit more detail about match funding when we get a little bit further on down the line. Okay. So, Creative Europe. Support program for the cultural and creative sectors. As I have explained before, Creative Europe is an umbrella name. There's no Creative Europe program per se. There are 3 strands within the new Creative Europe umbrella. There is the culture program, the media program, and then this 3rd strand you'll see there being a financial facility, which will be about supporting bank loans to the sector. That's due to come on stream in 2016. You'll see the budget of 1.5 billion is mostly to the media program, more than half going to media, 455 million for culture, and the rest for the financial facility. And just making the point at the bottom there that there has been this shift in the culture program away from sort of broad arts-based goals and citizenship and so on to projects which target what the Commission calls the real needs of the sectors. I put that in inverted commas because I'm not completely convinced that the European Commission really understands the real needs, but they're not doing too bad a job at the moment. The sorts of real needs are, as I said, linked to Europe 2020 agenda about job creation potential, capacity building, digital agenda, innovation, and so on. And we'll see how that comes through when we look at the detail. Firstly, the cultural and creative sectors in terms of definitions. I mean, once upon a time, it could be argued the definitions for culture were quite narrow. I mean, it did seem at one point that it was opera, orchestras, fine art museums, and not a lot else. But these days, they are deliberately trying to embrace all aspects of culture. You'll see in the first paragraph there, all sectors whose activities based on cultural values, artistic and creative expressions, whether these are market or non-market oriented. So in other words, what that's saying is that this program does embrace the commercial profit-making sector. So that even if you are involved in a activity or you're working for a business that is actually a profit-making business, you can still be a partner in a culture program project. You know, and if you are a non-profit organization, you could invite a profit-making partner to be involved. Obviously, the projects can't make a profit, but the partners might be. Whatever the type of structure carries them out, irrespective of how it is financed. Development, creation, production, dissemination, preservation. I mean, all this is simply saying that they're really, really open to any sorts of things that you might want to do, obviously depending on the criteria, which we'll come and look at in a moment. The 3rd paragraph, 3rd bullet there gives some examples of the sort of sectors they're talking about, and you'll see it's very, very all-embracing. The only caveat at the bottom is that if you are applying to the culture program, you can't put in a bid that is solely focused on the audiovisual sector. It has to embrace a number of sectors, of which one might be audiovisual. So you can't just put in a project based simply on audiovisual. You can put in programs that are based solely on theatre, or visual arts, or literature, but not audiovisual, because there is a separate media program which is designed to help projects focused on that particular area. Just a little sort of point about success rates and so on. I mean, in the last round of 7 years, which ended in 2013, the UK did well in some ways. I mean, if you look down there's a column for UK, a column for Italy, which has roughly the same population. You'll see the first row there says population as percentage of total populations across the whole of the EU. The UK and Italy both have around 10%. If you go down to successes as percentage of submissions, in the last column, you'll see the EU success rate was 28.3%. And the UK success rate was 35.6%. So we write good applications in the UK, for example. Success rate is better than 1 in 3. Italy, for example, just picking an example out of the air, had a very low success rate compared to the EU average. But if you look above that, they had more successful projects than the UK, 70 as opposed to 57 in the UK. And that's because countries like Italy and many other countries put in far more applications than the UK. Italy put in 396, the UK put in 160. So Italy was putting in nearly 2.5 times as many applications as the UK. So it's just worth noting that there is work to be done if you're in the UK. And I realise that not many people are on this particular webinar, but this is just a general particular point. I can provide statistics about other countries if people are interested. Okay, the objectives. So let's start with what this program is trying to do. And there are only 3 objectives, and here they are. Support the capacity of the sector to operate transnationally and internationally, promote the circulation of works, and the mobility of players. Now, those last 2, the circulation of works and the mobility of players, they've been around forever, and they really do underpin what the program is trying to do. So there should be some element of circulation of works and mobility of players within your application. The second objective is all about audience development. Now, this is a big flavour of the decade, or flavour of the month at least, for the European Union these days. Helping reach new and enlarged audiences, improving access to cultural and creative works, focus on children, young people, disabilities, and so on. Engaging in new and innovative ways to retain and enlarge audiences, improve the experience, deepen the relationship, and so on. And finally, contribute to innovation and creativity through artistic innovation, testing of new business models. So here we start to see the influence of Europe 2020 agenda, use of digital technologies, and the promotion of innovative spillovers on other sectors. Now that's an interesting one, that last one. What on earth does it mean, we ask ourselves? What it means is ways in which your project might be seen to have an impact on some of the other big issues relevant to what the European Union is trying to do. So, for example, if you're working on a project with disadvantaged young people who are unemployed or whatever, and if your project might provide them through the theatre work or the arts work you're doing, if you're providing these people with better skills or an enhanced way of even presenting themselves in a job interview, then your project has a spillover onto the big picture objective of Europe 2020 to help address the unemployment challenges across Europe. So in that way, you may find that your arts and culture project is spilling over onto the other themes and objectives of the European Union as expressed through the Europe 2020 agenda. Priorities. There are 6 priorities, and each project will need to address at least 1, maybe 2. Don't get carried away. No one expects any project to address more than 2 or maybe 3 priorities. You don't need to address all these, you just need to address a few very well. The first 3 priorities are about providing cultural and creative players with skills, competences, and know-how, helping people internationalize their careers and activities, and facilitating access to professional opportunities. The second 3 priorities are supporting international cultural activities, such as exhibitions, exchanges, festivals, performances. Many people rather, will tick that particular box. The 5th one is about circulation of European literature. They're very, very keen on literature projects because that area is always underfunded. Fewer applications in literature. And point 6 is audience development. And that's virtually the same thing that appeared, or same statement that appeared in the objective. So audience development, if you can help deliver in those areas, they will be very keen to find that within your project application. Flexible interdisciplinary approach. So they basically say, projects can focus on 1 or more priorities, 1 or more points of the value chain in 1 or more cultural and creative sectors. In other words, do what you like. they're really open here. They really say, we want you to come to us with innovative ideas. And that's the key. At the end of the day, an innovative, imaginative, amazing, whiz-bang, never been done before idea is what will tick the boxes. They're not interested in funding yet another production of Hamlet. They want to fund something that's a bit interesting. And I think that's one of the reasons why they say interdisciplinary. Once upon a time, if you got 4 Baroque orchestras together, that was seen as a good idea. But these days, they're more interested in maybe a Baroque orchestra and a contemporary art installation and a fashion designer coming together. Something where there is innovation because of the nature, the different experiences or areas of expertise of the various partners. You don't have to do that. You can still put an application in with 4 Baroque orchestras. That's entirely up to you. But the principle of innovation is really important. In particular, not-for-profit projects. I mean, obviously, the projects can't make a profit, but you can have profit-making partners, as I said earlier. Subsidiarity. I have to mention subsidiarity because it's in the criteria, but we can really forget about it because subsidiarity is the principle that the EU can't fund anything unless it's absolutely clear that this is unique and would not otherwise happen at the European level. Now, these are projects involving partners from different European countries, and I think we can say that they do not need to worry about the problems of subsidiarity. So let's move swiftly on. The strands. Okay, so there are different strands within the culture program. There were a whole raft of strands in the old program. These days, we have the project strand and the literary translation strand are the 2 main activity strands. The projects is going to be the main one for people. Okay, big projects, small projects. I'll explain those in a moment. 70% of the budget goes on the project strand. There is some money for literary translation, and I'll explain what that is all about. There is money for European platforms, and I'll explain that briefly as well. There is support for European cultural networks and some special actions, but I'm not sure if that is actually relevant to most people here. If you are interested in that, then send me an email. I can tell you a little bit more information about that. The networks is about supporting European cultural networks, representing organizations in their particular field all over Europe and so on. Okay, literary translation. So very briefly about literary translation before we focus on the project strand. Supporting a translation publisher of a package of work. So this is for publishers to submit a slate of up to 10 books, and they can do that for 1 year or they can submit several years to get those works translated from one of the official languages into another of the official languages. And you can also translate out of Latin and ancient Greek if you are so inclined. Applicants must be publishers or publishing houses. You can get up to 100,000 euros on a 50-50 basis, so 50% from the commission and 50% from your own resources or anywhere else you can get the money from. And they're keen, as it says at the very bottom, to raise the profile of translators. So the deadline, I'm afraid, for that has either just passed or is about to pass. It's in February. So if you're not geared up for that, then forget it until next year. Platforms. Now, I'm not going to spend too much time on platforms because we've only got an hour for this webinar. Platforms is a little challenging. It's an interesting idea. The idea is to put together projects which are about helping to highlight and promote a particular art form area, and particularly to offer support for emerging talent in a particular art form area. So it may be that a whole bunch of organizations interested in the visual arts all over Europe will get together to promote the visual arts in Europe and to encourage young artists. That's what it's all about. You'll see that you need a coordinator and 10 partners, and the lead organizer may be there to give out the money that is applied for. You don't actually have to spend the money on one single project. It may be that over the course of your project, you'll spend money on all sorts of different activities that will overall contribute to the raising of the profile of this particular cultural area and to supporting emerging talent. You can get up to €500,000 per year on the basis of an 80-20 intervention. In other words, the Commission will put in 80%. You only have to raise the other 20%. The very strong commitment to the sort of raising of the profile, the marketing, communication, and so on. You'll see at the very bottom they talk about a branding strategy, including where appropriate the creation of a European quality label. So you walk past the airport bookstall and you'll see that certain books have got a big gold star stamped on them, which will be the European Union Quality Seal of Approval that's emerged as a result of a platform project based on literature. So, for example, that's all I'm going to say about platforms. If you want more information, we can talk about that later. So before we go any further, I realise I need to go back and just check on the questions to see if anybody has submitted any questions. Trevelyan, you're here. I'm sorry, I hope you didn't miss too much, but we're only now starting looking at the projects, and I think the project is going to be what is most relevant to people, so we will continue with that. If I can go back to the slides. Yes, I think I can go back to the slides. Okay. Right, so we're going to focus on projects, which is what most people are interested in. As I said, if you're interested in literary translation or the platforms, then please do send me an email and we can talk more about that, but we really haven't got time in this short webinar today. Projects. Small projects, big projects. Small projects, you need 3, a project leader and 2 co-organizers, so 3 partners from 3 different countries. In the large projects, you need 6, minimum 6. Leader plus 5, 6 different countries. You'll see small projects can get up to 200,000 euros for the project, which is 60% of the budget, so they have to raise the other 40%. And large projects can get up to 2 million euros for their project, which is a lot of money. But you'll see it's a 50-50 intervention rate. So you get 2 million euros from the Commission, but you have to raise another 2 million euros in match funding, which may be a challenge. So, 4 million euro projects are quite rare in the large projects because the challenges of match funding are, a challenge for everybody these days. You'll see that projects can run for up to 4 years. So whether it's a small project or a large project, you can now run your project for up to 4 years. If you're running a small project, we don't recommend you drag it out for 4 years. 2 or 3 years is about appropriate for a small project, but obviously a large project may want to go for 4 years. And you cannot add in what we are now calling associate partners, and I'll explain what they are in a moment. Okay, project examples. One of the things that the program guide does these days, if you look at the latest version, is it provides some information on possible projects and gives you some examples. Now, obviously, these are designed to sort of stimulate you into thinking about all sorts of different things you can do, so they're quite comprehensive. Please don't think that you have to do everything in this sort of example. I mean, this is a performing arts example where cultural organizations like concert halls, opera houses, theaters, festivals, orchestras, and so on come together to co-produce and or perform and tour in different venues and events in different countries. Okay, could be a single event if the single event has a very large profile, very high profile. So if you're going to perform your activity at in the Edinburgh Festival or Salzburg or Avignon, one of the really large-scale events in Europe, then you may not need to do a tour because those events are seen as having a very large visibility and therefore a multiplier effect in themselves. This all goes on about what new or avant-garde works, audience development, you'll see is back in there, helping people with their careers, reaching more audiences, extending the lifespan of productions, developing sustainable cooperation, and so on and so forth. So lots of things that you might want to do in one of these project examples. The second and third examples are about exchanges, 2 types of exchanges. The first exchange is very much focused on capacity building. So helping people acquire skills and know-how to adapt to what is called the changing environment. In other words, there's a digital shift, new business models, new approaches to audience development, and so on. So projects may help the participating organizations and maybe others adapt to these new challenges. And the other set of exchanges you'll see is more about sort of helping the artistic and the creative development of artists and other creative practitioners. So this might be more about residencies and stays in other countries to sort of help them develop their careers. So those are 2 types of examples there. The final example is where you do not necessarily have living artists. So in case of museums or galleries or heritage sites where they are, the work of non-living artists, then this is about making applications which are going to help new or existing works to circulate, touring exhibitions, the loan of exhibits to different countries, and so on and so forth. Once again, you'll see this one ends up with the familiar refrain of artist development, audience development, I need to say. Okay, but my big but at the bottom there, just reinforcing, individual project doesn't necessarily have to do everything that's suggested in any of these project examples, and I just stress that the innovative, imaginative idea is what they are really looking for. And there's a project example here, which I just think is a really good example of innovative idea, simple, innovative idea, weather stations. It's a literature-based project. Essentially, what's happening here is that they are putting an artist in a residence in a weather from one country into a weather station in another country. They're inviting them then to spend 3 months or 6 months, however long it is, reflecting on the impact of climate change in Europe in the 21st century. And that's essentially the project. You know, there's not a lot going on, but it's just a lovely, lovely idea. Obviously, there'll be dissemination and the involvement of schools and community groups and so on and so forth, but it's just a nice, simple, innovative idea, not been done before, and you can see why it was successful. Okay. Successful UK-led projects. There's been one round of the culture programme so far, and these are the successful projects. There were 2 large-scale projects, and diverse, you'll see. Pilot Theatre doing a project called Platform Shift Plus. The European Youth Orchestra doing towards 2020, skilling musicians and engaging audiences. So they've cleverly combined the capacity building and the audience development. And then some small projects, Common Cultural Connections, Hampshire and White Trust for Maritime Archaeology. A new music project by Curated Place, based here in Manchester. A project called Takeover by British Council. I've got no idea what the project's about, but I'll try and find out. And then an interesting project from the Tate about writing exhibitions exhibiting literature. They've clearly gone for the literature box to tick that, because that is an area that is under-resourced. So there's some examples of successful UK-led projects in 2014. There were many other projects from other countries as well. I've only put up the UK projects. Okay, so just reinforcing where I've been heading. There are 3 main aspects to creating a successful project. And in my view, the application forms are at the bottom. People do obsess about the European application forms, and I understand why. They're not as straightforward as they might be. But they have improved a great deal in the last few years, and there are people around like the Creative Europe Desk and ourselves and so on who can help you understand the application forms. I mean, we provide, if you're a Connexus member, you can download the Am I Ready template, which you can use to assess how ready you are to start applying for the culture programme. The idea and the partnership are really absolutely crucial. The bright idea and a strong partnership. And they're linked, of course. I mean, you may have a bright idea, but your bright idea will have to be taken on board by the partners, and no doubt it will then evolve with the partners' own ideas, and you have to be open to the partners shaping your wonderful idea, because unless they buy into the project, it's not going to work. So the idea and the partnership are crucial. So we're going to talk about partners briefly. I'm just going to go back and check again to make sure there are no other questions coming on screen. We have another person as well. Narcissa is here. Great. Terrific. Sorry you're a bit late, Narcissa. Never mind. Okay, we'll go on back to the slides, if I can make the slides work, if I can find the slides. Yep. Okay. So, partners. Who can be partner? Where can partners come from? 28 member states. So any of the 28 member states, which are listed there, I'm sure you can all recite that list in alphabetical order with your eyes closed. Other countries, once they sign an agreement. So we're in the process of sorting out agreements between a range of other countries to participate. The EFTA, EEA, European Economic Area countries, Norway and Iceland have signed up. The accession and candidate countries, Balkans and Turkey, Albania, Bosnia, Macedonia, Montenegro and Serbia. And I think actually Turkey may have signed up now, but we'll need to double check that. So you have to check whether they have signed the agreement. And these agreements have to be with a particular program. So if they've signed up for another program, doesn't mean they've signed up for the culture program. We have to be clear about that. And then the neighbourhood countries. Interestingly, the countries in what is called the neighbourhood, the European neighbourhood, which are the countries of North Africa, the Middle East and the Caucasus, these countries are starting to sign up as well. And at last count, I believe Georgia and Moldova had signed up. Not just the 28 member states, it's about 37 or 38 countries these days which are eligible to participate as full partners in this program. This schedule indicates also the opportunities for countries outside the eligible countries. So the eligible countries are the central column, and then the final column is the non-eligible countries in other parts of the world. Now, the lead organizer and the co-organizers obviously have to come from the eligible countries. Lead organizer there, plus two or five other partners from different countries to make up the minimum. Once you've made up the minimum, you can involve additional co-organizers as well, which can come from different countries or even the same country. I mean, once you have your basic number, 3 for a small project from different countries, you could add a fourth co-organizer, and that fourth co-organizer could come from a different country or even from the same one. And then you have the opportunity to add in associate partners, and they can come from the eligible countries, in other words, that list on the previous slide, or they can come from absolutely anywhere in the world. So you could invite a partner into your project from the United States or Uruguay or Uganda or anywhere else. And the only caveat is that you cannot spend more than 30% of the project budget on the involvement of these partners from third countries. Okay? So I hope that makes sense. Number of partners. We always advise that people should go for one more than the minimum number of partners. There is a quote now which says that preference will be given to projects associating a number of partners higher than the minimum level. So if your requirement is 3, then try and get 4. There is another practical reason for that, and that is if something goes wrong with one of your partners. If you only have the minimum, say 3, and one of them has to drop out for whatever reason, then your project has to stop while you sort the mess out. Whereas if you had 4 and one dropped out, you would still be legal and you would still keep going while you sort the mess out. So that's another practical reason for having more than the minimum number of partners. Particular countries, not your immediate neighbours. Yes, there is now a clause which says they don't really want you just to get together with your neighbouring countries. They want you to be a bit more imaginative. So those days of partnerships, if you were in the UK, of teaming up with Ireland and France, are a bit passé. You should be looking a bit more broadly, to associate with Eastern European countries if you're in the UK, or Mediterranean countries, and likewise, depending on where you are in Europe, do remember that there are countries in the north, south, east, and west. Try and make your partnership as interesting as possible. Practical issues. Partners can be any type of organisations, provided they are legally recognised in their own country. So universities, local authorities, profit-making, not-for-profit, and so on. You have to have been in existence as an organisation for at least 2 years on the date of deadline. So unfortunately, if you're a brand new company, you can't be an organiser or a co-organiser. You have to have been in existence for at least 2 years. You must register to get your participant identification code. This is a very simple and straightforward system. Each individual partner registers for their code. They send their code to the lead partner. So when the lead partner goes to fill in the application form, they simply insert the code numbers, and up will pop all the details of those particular organisations. It's quite a nice, simple, straightforward process, which you can find by going to that particular portal there. Finally, point: individuals, known as natural persons in EU speak, individuals cannot apply for a grant. It has to be organisations. Right, partnerships, commitment to the project being European, so good breadth of European partners. Bring new and different strengths, so not the same sorts of experience or expertise across the partners, but dynamism between the partners. Clarity in the structure and role of each partner. I mean, the application form now requires you to produce a project schedule with a row for each activity and columns for what's happening. So you'd have a row for, first meetings, development phase, rehearsals, workshops, second meeting, performances, third meeting, conference, fourth meeting, whatever. And each of those rows, you'd have to identify when it's happening, where it's happening, which partner's responsible, and so on and so forth. So it's a bit tedious to do it, but it's really useful because it means that by the time you put your application in, there's a very clear plan of what everybody is doing, when it's happening, what the partners are responsible for, and so on and so forth. Enable each partner to have roughly equivalent role. That's a very good idea. Otherwise, the Commission might think that the application is a one-country project pretending to be European. You know, it's something coming in from the UK, where the partners look like the people they met on holiday in Corfu the week before the deadline, rather than being genuine partners. So, you know, you've got to really make sure that these are genuine partners. Demonstrate collective ownership. This is what I was saying earlier about everybody buying in, everybody getting something out of the project, and it's all working towards achieving the overall aims and objectives. Finding partners. These are a couple of suggestions here. The European networks, lots of European cultural networks. You know, join one, go to their annual meetings if you possibly can, get involved with one of these cultural networks and get their newsletters at the very least. You know, you may find people who are also looking for partners to do projects. There are national networks and agencies. You know, there will be a theatre association or a visual art association in most European member states. You know, talk to them. Their website will probably also be in English as well as their own language. The contact points in the smaller countries, the Creative Europe desks now in the smaller countries, they might be worth talking to, because if they're in a small country, they might know of some organizations that might be, you know, just right to meet the needs that you have for your particular activity. Partner search databases. The various contact points for the different programs are developing these. There is a sort of a fairly basic but perfectly valid contact point database that's operated via the UK Creative Europe desk, but there are others available as well. If you go to any of the Creative Europe desk websites, you'll find information about them. There are databases of previously successful projects which may help you find some partners. The one in the UK is called Space and can be found on the UK website, which I'll come to in a moment. There are European offices in many local authorities or municipalities or city councils. Sometimes they have some interesting contacts in other countries which might be worth following up. Some countries and regions have an office in Brussels. Even some parts of the UK have offices in Brussels, and their job is to help boost European funding for their region, and they may also have some contacts. And finally, the European Commission itself organises meetings in Brussels from time to time. Now, you sometimes don't need to go to Brussels to get the information. You get that from the Creative Europe desk or the contact point or people like us. But one of the joys of going to Brussels is that you might meet potentially lots of interesting people. You might meet up with a network of people from other countries and develop some new links and contacts or so. Okay, submitting an application, and once more, I'm just going to check to make sure that there are no questions that have come online. Right, somebody has asked the question about whether there is any funding for visits to find cultural partners or seminars to be funded to attend. Right. The Culture Programme doesn't offer any grants for people to go and find partners, I'm afraid. It is possible to apply to another programme, such as the Erasmus Plus programme, which does offer mobility grants. And although you have to meet the criteria for your Erasmus Education Training Youth Mobility Grant, it may be that you can have a secondary purpose of undertaking your Erasmus Mobility, which is to meet partners who you might want to join up with and put a Culture Programme application in sometime down the line. So they've made ways of doing it that way. The only other thing I would say is that the Arts Council in England, is certainly, saying it is more open to small applications to go to meet partners. I mean, they've just opened up their showcasing fund, which is for big applications, I realise. But, you know, small grants for the arts application might be successful. One thing I would say about this is that there is the European Cultural Forum likely to be happening in November of this year, and that will be, it happens every 2 years in Brussels for about 2 or 3 days. Over 1,000 cultural people, creative, cultural, artistic, whatever, people from all over Europe will be attending the European Cultural Forum, and it may be worth putting an application in to sort of see if you can get, you know, a few £100 together to travel to that, because that would be a good opportunity for meeting people. Okay, right, back to the slides. Okay, submitting an application. Right, the second call, the deadline is in October. So the first Wednesday in October 2015. You'll be informed by March of the following year. The start date, you can choose your start date in May to December of the following year. So the deadline is, October 2015. Your start date could be between May and December 2016. And you would then add 1 to 4 years to get your end date. So, I mean, if you chose December 2016 as your start date, your end date would be December 2020. Of course, you can add up to 4 years. So this could be long-term planning, but you don't have to add 4 years, and you could choose your start date in May. So, you know, your project may only go for 18 months or 2 years, in which case it would be an earlier end date. The contact point in the UK is the Creative Europe desk for the culture program. If you go to the European Commission or the agency website, you can find the contact points from other countries. Every country has a Creative Europe desk looking after both the media program and the culture program, and there'll be somebody there that you can talk to. The UK website and email address is there, and there are separate contacts in Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. We do offer a service to help you prepare your application, but obviously we're independent, so there has to be a small charge associated with that. Online application system. In one of the official EU languages, we always advise you to select English if you possibly can. It is the lingua franca of Europe for these sorts of applications. Whether or not that's a good thing or not, we'll move on rather than discuss that particular question. One of the main languages of Europe, English, French, German, would be probably recommended. Not a good idea, I don't think, to put the application in one of the smaller languages of one of the smaller countries, I'm afraid. You can obtain the online forms from that particular website there. They may not be out yet because they don't really announce and put them up until July. If you're interested in what's in the application form, contact me and we can send you a summary of what's in the application form. There's a deadline where you have to press the button. It's an online application form. Press the button. 12 noon on the date of deadline. For goodness sake, that's 11 a.m. UK time, so make sure you press the button at least the day before that deadline. You then have to print it out and post it with various attachments on a disk or memory stick. It is interesting that the culture program is now one of the very few programs where you have to also print and post. And that's to do with mainly to do with the flexibility of the budget. That in a culture program application, you could be very creative about creating your budget. Whereas most other European programs are now moving towards a sort of flat rate lump sum system based on certain characteristics and criteria, but not the culture program. Well, not yet anyway. So that means that unfortunately you do have to print things out and then post everything off to Brussels. One day it will be probably more straightforward. Maybe this year, who knows? Applying more than once. The project leader can apply only once each year, so you can only apply as either Category 1 or Category 2, in other words, small projects or big projects. If you are a project leader of a large project, you can't apply again as a leader until your large project has finished. Okay? You can apply as a co-organizer in as many other projects as you like, but you can't apply as a project leader until your large project is over. This only applies to large projects. Okay. Selection process. Right, well, there's the selection process. Deadline, date, postmark, pressing the button, and all the rest of it. Eligibility, selection, then selection criteria. Award criteria is when the juries get together. It says there juries meet to select. Actually, they don't meet much these days. They tend to do it all online. So the juries, wherever they happen to be all over Europe, will receive their batch of applications and they will read them and then they will give them their feedback, and then the scores will be averaged across the jury members who are looking at the different applications, and you get a final score. The only point I want to really make here is that the way in which it works is that, you know, the jury scores are averaged for each individual application from the jury members who've seen that application, and that final score is then put on, you know, the giant spreadsheet, and the giant spreadsheet is then reordered so the highest scores are at the top, and they go through and give the money away until they run out of money. So, in my view, you should always apply for the largest amount of money available. There is nothing to be gained by applying for less. You know, if you're applying to your local ministry or arts council or whatever, sometimes people say, oh, well, the maximum you can apply for is 10,000, 50,000, and we've applied for 30,000, so therefore they'll think, you know, they'll look more favourably upon our application because we're not being greedy. This doesn't apply in Europe. Be as greedy as you like. Providing your budget can justify it, go for broke, apply for the maximum amount of money available. Finances and budgets. Okay, go on with this. Only one grant, so you can't get more than one European grant for your particular project. Well, that's fairly straightforward. You do have to, if you are, you might decide that your project is both culture and education, so you'll apply to both culture and Erasmus. You have to make that clear in your application form that you're applying to both, and you have to state that you will reject one grant if you are offered both, because you can obviously only have one. And if you don't tell them that and they find out, they will get really angry. Not a good idea. Structure of the budget. Okay, this is where we start talking about the finances, nitty-gritty. As I've said at the very beginning, small projects up to 200,000 being 60%, large projects $500,000 up to 50%. The other 40 to 50% is known as the match funding. The match funding can include project-generated income. So if you are selling tickets, sales of publications like programs or CDs or DVDs or whatever, registration fees to workshops, merchandising, if you're selling T-shirts and mouse mats and gonks and goodness knows what, all of that can be included as match funding. The remaining match funding has to be generated by the project co-organizers, not necessarily equally. I mean, obviously, if you have a partner in Norway and a partner in Albania, their capacity to generate match funding will be wildly different. So they can't expect that it will be equal, but every partner has to put in, every co-organizer has to put in some match funding. It can come from your own resources. If you happen to have your wealthy Norwegian partner, they might be persuaded to put in some money out of their generous bank account for the project. Otherwise, you can apply for grants, sponsorship, donations, crowdfunding, anything you can think of. And you can have some seconded staff working on the project. So if you have staff who are employed by your organization who are going to be seconded to work on the project, the equivalence of their salary for the time they're working on the project, so 50% if they're working half a week for the year, then the 50% can be included as both income and expenditure. You can't have contributions in kind. If you're doing staff costs, you have to sort of set up various systems to make sure there's timesheets and all those other things are operating, unless the person is seconded full-time to work on the project. If they're seconded full-time to work on the project, then you don't need to do timesheets and so on. There must be actual costs and so on. No contributions in kind. The mantra is that cash must be seen to flow. So you have to make absolutely certain that you can that you're not putting any in-kind contributions in, and what you may have to do is the goal is to try and sort of persuade people that they might sort of donate some money to your project if you are using their services. So you can't go to your printer, for example, and say, give us some free posters, and then cost that some imaginary 2,000 euros. But if you pay 2,000 euros to the printer for posters, so money goes out of your account, and then you can persuade that printer to donate some money back to your project, so 1,500 euros might come in, great, that's fine. But real money has to flow both ways. Okay. You can also put in 7% of the budget as a flat rate amount to cover your overheads. So that's certainly possible as well. And you don't give any evidence of what that 7% is covering when you make, nor when you put in your final report and your final financial statements. However, if your project was audited and the auditors came in and they checked sort of 1 in 10 projects, then you would need to be able to sort of say, well, this is the 7%, and we've broken that down by looking at our, overheads and our electricity bill and our phone bill and our photocopier bill, and we've calculated that the project represents 40% of our activity, and so therefore it roughly is 40% of our bills. So you need to be able to sort of demonstrate that this was a realistic figure. Subcontracting. Nothing wrong with subcontracting. The Commission goes on at length about subcontracting in a very intimidating manner, but there's nothing wrong with the principle of subcontracting. If you're doing an outdoor event, you may have to hire staging and portaloos and goodness knows what. That's absolutely fine. You have to make sure you do it correctly. So if there are procurement procedures which really only kick in over quite a large amount of money in any serious way, you should be getting tenders for anything you are putting out. You are subcontracting and choosing the best from 3 or more tenders and so on. You should just be doing it in the correct manner. Payment procedures. The good thing about the transnational funds is they do pay up front. So if your project is up to 2 years and you're applying for less than €750,000, which will be most small projects, then you can get 70% at the beginning of the project. So 70% at the beginning and the final 30% at the end. If your project is more than 2 years rather, then you'll get 50% at the beginning, and then you'll get another 30% when you've spent 70% of the first 50%. I hope you can understand that. It just means there's 2 interim payments, and then your final payment is 20%, which is slightly better because that's less of a final payment than the other one where the final payment is 30%. I hope that makes sense. Okay, this is the last section, so I'm just now going to go back quickly and just check again, see if there are any other questions. Yes, Trevelyan has made the point about match funding being the reason why people don't apply for the maximum. It's certainly in terms of the large projects. That's absolutely right. There was a project a few years ago where it was a large project led by Tate again, and they had 6 or 7 of the most fantastic museums and galleries from all over Europe who were their partners, and they were applying for that. But I think that rather than €4 million budget, I think the maximum they could get together was about €2.5 million because of the difficulties in finding match funding. So I completely agree, particularly in large projects. In small projects, I think most people do manage to find a way of applying for the maximum, because by the time you break down, if you're applying for €200,000, then you're looking for €160,000 over a couple of years amongst 4 partners. So that's €40,000 over a couple of years, which is only €20,000 per year, which is only whatever it is in pounds sterling, some of which might be seconded staff. So I think the match funding criteria for smaller projects is much less daunting than maybe some people think at the beginning. But I'm not saying it's easy. I do accept that it can be a bit of a challenge. Right, I'm just going to go back to the slides for the final little bit. Okay. Criteria. Okay, so I'm just going to finish off by just emphasizing the criteria. Now, if you're looking at different funding programs in the transnational funds, you'll find that some of them, pardon me, like the Culture Program, Europe for Citizens, Erasmus Plus, and so on, there is beginning to be commonality in the sort of areas of criteria. So for the Culture Program, there are 4 criteria. And these are quite common across other programs as well in terms of their broad headings. I mean, obviously the detail are different because this is the Culture Program. The first criteria is how relevant is the project to the objectives and the priorities. Okay. So how does the project contribute to reinforcing professionalization and capacity to operate transnationally? How does it work on promoting circulation of works, mobility of artists, which is what I said at the very beginning? How does it improve access to cultural and creative work? So those sorts of criteria. And then how relevant is your project to whichever of the 6 priorities you've chosen? You remember at the very beginning, apart from 3 objectives, I explained there were 6 priorities. You will choose 1 or 2 of those, and then you have to say which ones you've chosen, why you've chosen them, and how your project is going to relate to those particular priorities. I'm not going to go through all those again. You've seen them before. Then, interestingly, at the bottom, there may be other priorities. There are 2 specific questions, one which has been there forever and one which is new, which are now also included within this particular criteria. The first one, to what extent is the project aiming at producing results which go beyond the sole interest of the partners and participants and have long-term impacts? This is the legacy issue. What are you leaving behind? What is the impact? There's the magic word of valorization, which is promoting the success of projects funded by the European Union. Valorization is very important, and they're very keen on what's the legacy. So this is projects not just for the benefit of the partners and the participants or the audiences or the visitors during the course of the project, but what are you leaving behind? Now, again, this doesn't have to be super complicated. If you're doing, I used the example earlier on of the a theatre project on disadvantaged housing estates. Well, if your theatre project on disadvantaged housing estates, work really well, and you then decide we're going to document this project and how you can produce the sort of guide to help other people do a similar project. And you produce this guide and you make it interesting and online and full of all sorts of audiovisual tricks and techniques to engage people in wanting to do this project, and you put it online in several different languages, and you then make that available all over Europe. That's your legacy. So that's a way in which you are encouraging others to do similar projects, and the Commission is very interested in that. The final criteria here is how complementary is the project to cultural actions implemented at national, regional or local level. This is brand new in this new program, and I think this is really interesting. So this is your opportunity to say, well, not only is my project relevant to all these European criteria that you, the European Commission, have dreamt up, but actually it's also relevant to what's happening in our member states. So it's relevant to the policy of our Ministry of Culture or our Arts Council or the City Council where we are doing our work, or the local council. Anywhere where you can sort of find bridges. So these projects are not just seen as European projects in isolation. These projects are seen as projects that reflect particular other criteria and needs that have been set by the member states themselves at national, regional or local level. The second criteria is the quality of the content. So what you're actually doing during this project, how the credibility of the artistic personnel, the creative practitioners who are involved, how well planned and defined what it is you are going to do, the activities to be implemented, your evaluation process, how you're assessing what's going on, your detailed audience development strategy, the experience of the people taking part, and so on and so forth. The quality of the content. The third one is your communication dissemination strategy. How well are you communicating what's happening during the project to get in audiences and visitors during the project, and how well are you going to communicate the results of the project to make sure people are aware of the legacy at the end of the day. And the fourth one is the quality of the partnership. In other words, who's actually involved in this particular project, but also how you're going to manage this project. What have you put in place to make sure this project is going to be well managed and is going to deliver what it is that you said you're going to deliver, making sure that the right thing is delivered at the right place, at the right time, at the advertised price, and all that. And you'll see at the bottom there the extent to which the partnership goes beyond the geographical neighbours. So that's where that particular issue that I mentioned earlier comes in. And that's it. Those are the four criteria. Looking for match funding, a couple of other suggestions here. Actually, the first two aren't about match funding. That's the Council of Europe and UNESCO don't really provide match funding, but they're useful resources in case you want to sort of give your project additional context in what's been happening in culture in Europe in the last 100 years. The Council of Europe and UNESCO have some interesting contextual information, as well as some interesting examples of good practice in a range of countries. The Anna Lindh Euro-Mediterranean Foundation is very keen on projects involving partners from North Africa, the Middle East, so they might be relevant. And there is the European Foundation Centre based in Brussels, which is a trade body for trusts and foundations across Europe, and it does have some contact details for trusts and foundations that might be relevant if you're looking for match funding. Next steps, do sign up for our Twitter feed and also sign up for the information provided by the UK Creative Europe desk, very useful. For the culture programme, assess which strands, small projects, large projects, or platforms, whatever, right for you. How ready are you? Use our Am I Ready template, decide which deadline this year or maybe in the future. And as I said earlier, have your really good idea, unique, innovative, different, and make sure you get your partners on board as quickly and as early as possible. That's it. I've gone on about what wonderful services we also provide, either for additional fee or if you're a Connexus member. They're all listed there and on your pack, and that's the end of the webinar. So I'm now going to go back and just check once again to see whether anybody has any final questions, but as I said, you can also send afterwards. Right, what needs to be confirmed as match? Absolutely nothing needs to be confirmed as match funding when you apply. If you can say we have got commitment, the only thing that cannot change is if you say you're putting money in from your own resources. If you say we're going to put 10,000 in from our own resources, or partner X is going to put 10,000 in from their resources, that has to stay. That cannot change. But everything else is an estimate. ticket sales will be estimates. Your applications to the Arts Council will be an estimate. Your whatever else it might be is an estimate. And there is flexibility over the course of the project to revise your estimates. We urge you to try and be as accurate as possible, but you do not have to have your match funding confirmed at the time of application. And if you're doing a small project that's only in the last 2 or 3 years, there's only one budget. Okay, the budget is seen as an overall project. There's no difference between year 1 and year 2. You may be running your project for 3 years, but that's for a small project, that's one grant. So you'll receive 70% of your total grant at the beginning of the project. How you spend that over the course of 2 or 3 years is up to you to spend it in an appropriate manner in order to deliver what your project is set out to do. Right, I hope that covers that question. If there's anybody got any other questions, I will hang on here for a few more minutes. Otherwise, thank you very much for participating, and maybe I will be hearing from some of you tomorrow or later on this week if you are booked in for any of the other webinars or the webinar next week. So I will just hang on for a few moments because I know there's a time delay. If you think of another question later, then as I said, please feel free to email me. Great, thank you. That's great, terrific. And more will be back tomorrow. Trevelyan, you're a sucker for punishment. Thanks for now. See you tomorrow. Okay, that's it. I'll close the webinar now down. And I hope that was useful for everybody. Okay, we'll be back on tomorrow. Thanks very much. Bye.